There is a line from Jordan Peterson that I find myself returning to pretty often. He says that we do not, in fact, have the option of living without a vision for our lives. We can develop a good one or a bad one, a deliberate one or an inherited one. But the option of having no vision at all was never actually on the table. Even drifting, on his account, is a kind of vision. It is simply an unexamined one, governed by whichever short term whim happens to be the loudest that week. We like to imagine that some people simply opt out of the whole business of having a plan, coasting along unshaped by anything in particular, while the rest of us have to do the harder work of steering the boat. Now, Peterson's point is that this is actually just an illusion. Nobody coasts through life unshaped. We are always being organized by something. The only live question is whether that something is a purpose we have actually chosen, or simply a set of habits, fears, and appetites that are quietly running the show while we assume that no one is driving. And that, of course, is the free will debate, and it is worth being precise about what is actually being argued. If we are constantly being pulled by biology, upbringing, and culture, how much of our future is genuinely ours to write? And how much of it are we simply narrating afterwards as though we had chosen it? There are broadly three positions worth knowing. Determinism holds that every choice is the casual product of prior conditions, genetics, upbringing, and the precise state of a brain in any given moment, extending back in an unbroken chain that leaves no real fork in the road, however much it might feel like one. Libertarian free will, not with the political label, takes the opposite view, that we possess a genuine capacity to choose otherwise, a will that is not merely the last domino to fall in a consequence that was set in motion long before we arrived. Compatibilism sits between the two, and in my view is the most interesting of the three because it refuses the premise that freedom and causation are natural enemies. On this account, we are free because we act from our own reasons and character, rather than from coercion. Freedom here is not an exit from the causal chain. It is simply the particular kind of causation that runs through deliberation rather than around it. Now, a few philosophers give this debate real texture. Jean-Paul Sartre is probably the closest ancestor of the idea that choosing is not optional. His famous phrase was that we are condemned to freedom, since for Sartre, even the refusal to choose is itself a choice, complete with consequences that we cannot disown by pretending that we never made a decision. This maps almost exactly into Peterson's insistence that there is a no vision option. Both men, in their very different registers, are making the same accusation against the unexamined life, that it is not neutral at all. It is simply a badly built structure, mistaken for the absence of any structure at all. Now, Kierkegaard offers something adjacent but distinct, less concerned with the impossibility of neutrality and more with the discomfort of committing before the evidence is in. Kierkegaard was suspicious of the idea that we could reason our way into certainty on the questions that matter most, and his account of faith, which extends naturally to any serious life commitment, involves what he called a leap, an act of will that outpaces whatever justification is currently available. Waiting for full clarity before adopting a governing purpose is not patience. It is simply prudence. Nietzsche, meanwhile, gives the whole idea a sharp edge through his notion of self-overcoming. The demand that a life well lived requires the deliberate, ongoing ownership of the self, rather than a passive inheritance of whatever values arrived first and unopposed. He had little patience for people who absorbed their convictions from their surroundings without ever putting them under real pressure. And I think his entire project can be read as an accusation nearly identical to Peterson's, that the unexamined life does not simply fail to have a vision, it has a bad one, and calls it neutrality to avoid the responsibility of naming it. It would be intellectually lazy, however, to stack up agreeable philosophers and call the matter settled. So I want to give real weight to the strongest available objection. Spinoza would likely have found Peterson's framing a touch too flattering to human agency. For Spinoza, what feels like choosing from the inside is the unfolding of necessary causes that we simply do not have full visibility into. Freedom, on his account, does not mean breaking the causal chain. Instead, it means understanding our place within it clearly enough that we stop mistaking our determined nature for some foreign imposition. A free person, in this telling, has not escaped causation. They have simply stopped being confused about it. Now, I don't think that this debate resolves cleanly in either direction, and I am suspicious of anyone who claims that it does. But I would suggest that the practical structure Peterson is describing survives the challenge regardless of how the metaphysics eventually shakes out. Responsibility, planning, and self-correction do not require the strongest possible version of free will to remain meaningful. They only require that reflection changes behavior, and that revising our stated aims in light of new reasons produces a different future than the one we would otherwise have drifted into. Whether that capacity to revise counts as free will in the fullest philosophical sense, or simply as a more sophisticated link in a long causal chain, is a question that matters enormously to a metaphysician. It matters rather less to the actual business of living, though, because either way, the vision we are operating under, examined or not, chosen or inherited, is doing real work in shaping what comes next. Which brings me to the only question I think is actually worth asking. Not whether life grants us total, unconditioned freedom, because on nearly every serious philosophical account, it does not. The more useful question is whether we intend to let impulse, inherited ideology, or plain fear do the choosing on our behalf, while we tell ourselves that we simply never got around to deciding anything, or whether we are willing to take up the more demanding task of shaping a vision of purpose, aware of how much of it was handed to us and how much is still genuinely ours to revise. We may not get to make certain choices in life, but we do still choose again and again whether that vision will be deliberate, inherited, or destructive. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all next time.